power, possessions, profits, pleasures. You just carnal out. Because the pain is too great and you got to kill it. So you kill it by working 20 hours a day. You kill it by making it. And in his book, Flight from Woman, he said, and what had happened in Western culture, and he analyzes Descartes, he's the big guy, Sartre, Schopenhauer, Goethe, Kierkegaard, Leo Tolstoy. The best essay on Leo Tolstoy ever written is in that book, The Culture of Woman. And basically what he ends up saying, at least in my interpretation, is the fallen male became the image of success for everyone, including women. The fallen male, the corrupted male, the male who destroyed the Tao, who destroyed the image. He says that's what's going to happen. And that's an expression of Solzhenitsyn also. Solzhenitsyn spoke about human beings bez verkhneva etaja, without an upper story. They're nothing but flesh and blood and guts and Tommy guns and madness. And of course he was in the Marxist madness. And when he gave that famous Harvard speech, and he said, what has gone wrong? What's the matter? He said, you could talk about détente, open diplomacy, enlightened self-interest, spreading democracy, freedom, whatever. He said, but the Russian Baba in the village knows what's wrong. Said when there's trouble in the village, they just make the cross, shake their head and said, Ani pateriali obraz. Ani pateriali podobia. They lost the image. They lost the likeness. They're no longer godly people. They're no longer human. Solzhenitsyn's boys with the Tommy guns are no longer human. But we should remember, they're all baptized Orthodox. And by the way, another person who's in this talk this night is a lady called Alice Miller, who writes about childhood and child abuse and all that comes through this society that produces virtually hatred of children. Hatred of them to the point where, as Pope John Paul said in his Evangelium Vitae encyclical, The Gospel of Life, you can judge a society by how they treat their children, and basically these societies kill their children that they don't want. One way or another, but they kill them. Well, he says that when they've lost this image, then what's left? But Alice Miller, when she speaks about child abuse, for their own good, you shall not be aware, read these books. And I'm afraid that in reading them, we will see a lot of our own story in that book, and we'll see a lot of our own behavior either. Because, brothers and sisters, we are also tainted by all this stuff. We are, more than we think. But anyway, in one of her books, she wanted to show the two most horrible examples of the modern world, not the postmodern, but the modern world that she could think of. So she did analyses of Stalin, Ceausescu, and Hitler. Madmen. But let us in this holy cathedral remember that two of the three were Orthodox. They both were seminarians. And Ceausescu was the son of a priest, a PK. Yeah. So here's where we are. So he said, you could kill yourself, or kill your kids, or kill each other, or live in total oblivion of each other. And Jean-Paul Sartre said, even to prove that you're really a free person, you got to kill the other person. L'enfer, c'est les autres, he said. Hell is other people. They're looking at me. You know? Well, don't look at me. Well, we come to church and say the psalm, look at me. You know, look on me, O Lord. But there is one psalm that says, turn away and let me die already. But he said we're just surrounded by being and we're, crazy man. But they're all nuts. But what it is what I'm trying to say here at this point is you can kill yourself without literally killing yourself. You could kill yourself on work, on drugs, on sex, on just serving and being a brain and a body, a calculator and a copulator, a computer and a consumer. That's all you are. There's nothing human left in you. And then, as a matter of fact, in scriptural language, you're already dead. You can be existing. We talked with the kids the other night about a difference between existing and living. There's a big difference. And according to our view, you're only alive when you're in communion with God and filled with the divine energies and full of grace and dying to yourself in love for the neighbor in imitation of the crucified Christ. That's what we believe. Well, in the modern world, they would have said, you're nuts, and if you believe that, we're just going to kill you. In the postmodern world, they say, you really believe that? Well, that's really crazy, but if you want and it turns you around, that's fine. That's the difference. Because it all doesn't mean anything anyway. Now, in the modern world, that got us to the postmodern world, according to Stern himself in the book The Third Revolution, he said there's actually 4 revolutions. There was the Copernican revolution, which up until then everybody thought the planet Earth was the center of the universe. Then you discover we're not. We're just a speck floating around in 100,000 billion galaxies, 100 billion stars is going to blow up sooner or later because of the laws of entropy or something. So then you have what he called the nothing but. We think we're the world, but we're nothing but. And Schmemann used this, Father Alexander, used this word in his book For the Life of the World, where he said, as a matter of fact, humanly and scientifically, we are nothing but a whirling cemetery, filled with dead people's bones. And, brothers and sisters, scientifically, biologically, we're all dead people. We can move around, calculate, copulate for however we want, but we're dead. We can even serve divine liturgies every day. We're dead. Unless it isn't just nothing but that. Well, there's other nothing buts. The Copernican Galilean revolution did it with the cosmos. Darwin did it with biology. We're nothing but the survival of the fittest. Nothing but accidents of history because our neck grew long so we could eat and the others didn't, they died. Beautiful. It's like Solovyov said, we're all descended from apes, so let us love one another, But I think we, with Stern, would have to say, these guys didn't see nothing. There's scientific truth there. Their problem wasn't the scientific truth. Their problem was the philosophical and metaphysical conclusions they drew from it, which were unwarranted even logically, let alone theologically. Let alone that there's an intuition and an upper story that is supposed to, in C.S. Lewis's words, guide and guard and shape how we understand that data. But once the heart is gone, the noose is gone, it's nothing but data. Nothing but. We're nothing but a planet whirling through space. We're nothing but accidental, processes of biology or something. Then Marx came up with his nothing but. Socioeconomic. We're nothing but a dialectic of material history because of economics. And if economics, and that's, and all of these things have so many inner contradictions, they're not even funny. You could ask Darwin, how could you write that book if you're nothing but? But with Marxism, they're even contradiction, certainly in the Soviet form, of killing people. Why should they kill people? According to their theory, it's all going to die out anyway. Religion is not only the opium of the people, it's a superstructure that's going to just disappear in time when the proletarian revolts and all that kind of stuff. But the point was always made, like by Father Bulgakov, Fedotov, and others, that Russia was the least likely place to have a Marxist revolution on earth. It was an agrarian society with 80% peasants, who half of them were just freed from slavery and couldn't even read and write. Well, it's pretty hard to have all the workers of the work unite when that's what you've got. But of course, like so many of our ideologies, it was made in a library in London. But at the same time, he didn't see nothing either. He saw poverty. He saw workers. I always thought to myself that if my grandfather didn't leave Nevitsky and come to America, and Father Alexis Toth and my mother went to a funeral and came home and got pregnant and said, this boy's going to be a priest, and here I am. Talk about Flannery O'Connor, man. Wise blood. I probably would have been a communist. Sometimes I really think if I'd stayed there, I might have easily. Because my forebears were bonded serfs until the generation before my great-grandfather, and my grandmother couldn't read or write. My own mother went to 6th grade. My father's father died when he was 12, and he had to go work in the factory, and was an angry guy. And when he had free time, his father, when he wasn't beating him, sent him up to the church to watch the church because they were building the Russian Orthodox Church, and the Ku Klux Klan were burning crosses on the lawn in Endicott, New York, upstate New York. Believe it or not, But I could have easily been that, I think. One flick of a movement, and only God knows. So there is divine providence. So there is something to that. Well, what Carl Stern said is, you can kill yourself, and many people will opt for that. And I would go and say another outrageous thing. I think a lot of people who come to church are killing themselves too. The only thing is, their drug of choice is religion, not booze. Not work, not money, because they probably don't have enough money for that. So they come to church and play a role and eat up the priests and check out the music, and they feed their addiction every Saturday night and Sunday morning to deal with their pain. But then he said another option, this was 51, don't forget, is Marxism. But he dismissed that with like 3 sentences. He said, it is so rotten to the core that it's going to die out by itself. So probably it doesn't have long to live. And I don't think he would imagine that it would only have been 30 years or so. I don't think, of course he lived into the 60s. So he wrote this book 10 or 12 years before he actually died. But in any case, he says Marxism is rotten to the core, and no one will probably take that very much, except a few professors in Western universities. But then he said, I don't know how much I'm talking about. Then he said, an option, however, especially when Marxism implodes. And by the way, everybody praises, Pope John Paul II and Ronald Reagan for bringing about the fall of communism, and I'm sure they did their duty. But as a matter of fact, communism imploded because of its own inner rottenness. It was because of Chernobyl, which is, by the way, the name of wormwood in the Apocalypse in the Bible. But in any case, he said Marxism, some will still choose that. But it's doomed. But then he said there's another one that once it does fall, it's going to create incredible agony, suffering, and pain. And this is where he nailed his brother. And that one was, he said, nationalism. Nationalism. Everybody's going to say, our people, not those people, not those others. We have it. We need justice. And justice, well, as Camus said, justice is when both sides are right. Tragedy is when both sides are right. But on the other hand, unless that is broken by grace, he said, it'll just be a mass of blood. Go home and turn on the TV. Baghdad, Iraq, Lebanon, Palestine is still going on. But it's going on in our world too. Russia, Ukraine, Moldova. It's going on in church. Everybody asks, why are we not one in America as the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? Very simple answer. We don't want it. And why don't we want it? We don't want it because of the peepees. We're not going to give up our presvy, our power, our position, or anything else. We like our life. Anyway, they're not really Orthodox. The Russians say that about the Greeks say that about the Russians, the Arabics say that about both, and here we are. And the only one true church is I don't know what. But nationalism, he said, and he said he was afraid that was going to be a real horror. And the nationalistic people, they're not even in the Western European, American, Australian thing except by extension. However, the oligarchs, who are no longer human, are also nationalists. And there's an American nationalism too. But I'll leave that one to go to the one that he thought was the worst of all. He said the worst thing that's going to happen. He said, and don't forget, he only saw the TV set and the airplane. He had no idea of cybernetics. he said, but there is going to be an intellectual movement